Warning alarms shrieked, red screens flashing. Missile locked. The captain's voice cracked. We have 30 seconds before we're shot down. The cabin erupted in chaos. Passengers screaming, prayers echoing through the air. In seat 24A, a small woman clutched her head. Piercing memory flashes, forgotten fragments rushing back. Through the countdown, 10, 9, she stood up, grabbed the intercom, her voice booming. Valkyrie-62 Abort fire. The entire F-22 squadron froze, because that was the call sign of a lost commander they'd only heard through radio static years ago. Isabella Moretti sat in the corner of her small bookshop in Rome, arranging dusty novels with the methodical care of someone who had learned to find peace in simple routines. 32 years old, Italian heritage, petite frame, long black hair that she kept pulled back, and dark eyes that always seemed to carry a shadow of sadness she couldn't explain. The locals in her neighborhood knew her as La Donna Perduta, the lost woman, not lost in the sense of being homeless or without direction, but lost in the deeper way that comes from having no connection to your own past. 5 years earlier, Isabella had been found unconscious in a military hospital in Germany. No identification, no memory of how she had arrived, no recollection of anything before waking up in that sterile white room. The attending physicians had diagnosed severe retrograde amnesia, likely caused by head trauma from an unspecified accident. Military records from that time period were frustratingly incomplete. A female pilot had been reported missing in action during a classified operation. Her aircraft presumed destroyed. Body never recovered. But the paperwork was classified, sealed, and eventually marked KIA, body not recovered. The media had speculated briefly about a missing female fighter pilot, some suggesting she had been captured, others theorizing she had defected. But without concrete evidence, the story faded from public attention. Isabella had been discharged from the hospital with basic identity documents, a small disability pension from an unknown source, and nothing else. No family came forward to claim her. No friends appeared to help her rebuild her life. No colleagues from whatever career she had previously pursued. She had drifted to Rome almost by instinct, drawn to the ancient city for reasons she couldn't articulate. The bookshop had been for sale, a tiny space wedged between a cafe and a flower market, and something about it felt familiar. "You have good hands for handling books," observed Signora Benedetti, the elderly woman who had sold her the shop. Like someone who understands delicate things that need careful attention. But Isabella's peaceful routine was occasionally disrupted by strange episodes that she couldn't explain. The sound of aircraft engines overhead would cause her heart to race, her hands to shake, her vision to blur with fragmented images she couldn't quite grasp. Sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night, speaking words in languages she didn't remember learning, calling out names of people she didn't recognize, reaching for controls that weren't there. Mayday, Mayday, Blue Squadron is down, she had whispered one night, startling herself awake, wondering where those words had come from. Dr. Giuliano Rossi, the neurologist who monitored her condition, had explained that trauma-induced amnesia could sometimes recover in fragments, triggered by sensory experiences that connected to suppressed memories. Your brain is protecting itself from something painful, he had told her during one of their sessions. When you're ready, when you feel safe, the memories may return. But Isabella wasn't sure she wanted them to return. Her current life was quiet, predictable, free from whatever trauma had caused her to lose herself in the first place. The flight to London had been an impulse decision. A book dealer in England had contacted her about a rare manuscript, something that might be valuable enough to keep her shop operating for another year. The trip would be her first time on an aircraft since whenever her mysterious past had ended. As she settled into seat 24A, Isabella felt an inexplicable anxiety. The sound of the engines, the smell of jet fuel, the view of clouds through the small window. All of it triggered a deep uneasiness she couldn't name. "First time flying?" asked the businessman in 24B, noticing her white knuckles as she gripped the armrests. Isabella managed a weak smile. I think so. I'm not sure." Her response puzzled him, but he attributed it to typical pre-flight nerves and returned to his laptop. The flight attendant, Maria Santos, noticed something different about the woman in 24A during her safety check. Most nervous passengers fidget or ask questions, she later told investigators, but this woman was completely still, like she was listening for something the rest of us couldn't hear. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Isabella tried to read her book, but the words seemed to swim on the page. Images kept flashing through her mind. Cockpit instruments, radio static, voices calling for help. She pressed her palms against her temples, trying to push away the fragments that made no sense, trying to maintain the carefully constructed peace of her bookshop existence. But somewhere over the North Sea, that peace was about to shatter completely. A passenger in the adjacent row later recalled, "She looked like any other tourist, quiet, unremarkable. But there was something about her stillness that seemed professional, like she was unconsciously maintaining some kind of alert posture even while trying to relax." At 35,000 feet over the English Channel, everything changed in 30 seconds. The first indication of trouble was a subtle vibration through the aircraft's frame, followed immediately by the captain's voice over the intercom. Tension barely controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties. Please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened." But Isabella could hear what the passengers couldn't: the edge of panic in the pilot's voice, the way his words carried the weight of someone trying not to cause mass hysteria while dealing with a life-threatening emergency. Then the warning alarms began. Emergency lights bathed the cabin in hellish red. Backup systems activated with electronic screams that cut through the increasingly terrified voices of 240 passengers. Through the aircraft's communication system, a harsh American military voice crackled to life. "Unidentified civilian aircraft. You have entered restricted military airspace. Identify immediately, or you will be destroyed." The captain's response was barely audible over the cabin's growing panic. "This is British Airways Flight 447. We're experiencing navigation failure. Requesting immediate assistance." "Negative. You have 30 seconds to alter course, or we will engage." Isabella felt something crack open in her mind. The red warning lights, the sound of military radio chatter, the unmistakable tone of pilots prepared to use lethal force. All of it triggered a cascade of suppressed memories that hit her like physical blows. Kandahar Province, enemy fire, Squadron taking heavy losses. Valkyrie-62, you're the only one close enough to provide cover. Roger that. Blue Squadron, I'm coming in hot. Aircraft screaming through mountain valleys, tracer rounds lighting up the darkness, friendly forces pinned down and dying. Isabella gripped her seat, her body shaking as 5 years of locked-away memories came flooding back in fragments. She remembered the cockpit of an F-22 Raptor, remembered the weight of flight controls under her hands, remembered the voices of pilots who had depended on her for their lives. The countdown began over the military frequency. 20 seconds, 19, 18. Around her, passengers were praying, crying, holding each other as they faced the reality of imminent death. Children were screaming. Adults were hyperventilating. The flight crew was struggling to maintain any semblance of order. But Isabella was somewhere else entirely, reliving the moment when her squadron had been ambushed, when she had made the decision that cost her everything she was trying to remember. All units, abort the mission. I repeat, abort and withdraw. Valkyrie-62, we can't leave those ground troops. That's an order. I'll provide cover. Get everyone out of here. The memory hit her with devastating clarity. She had disobeyed direct orders, had sacrificed her career, her identity, her entire life, to save 300 soldiers who were about to be overrun. 10, 9, 8. Isabella stood up from seat 24A with movements that were suddenly precise, controlled, military. The confused bookshop owner was gone, replaced by someone who had commanded fighter squadrons in the world's most dangerous combat zones. She pushed past the terrified businessman, ignored the flight attendant's protests, and grabbed the aircraft's intercom system with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Her voice, when it came, was nothing like the soft-spoken Italian bookshop owner her neighbors knew. It was the voice of a combat veteran, steady under pressure, carrying the weight of command authority that couldn't be faked or taught. This is Valkyrie-62, Abort fire. The effect was immediate and electric. Every conversation in the cabin stopped. Every prayer, every sob, every whispered goodbye, all of it ceased as passengers stared at the small woman who had somehow transformed into someone else entirely. But the real shock was happening in the cockpits of the F-22 Raptors that had been seconds away from firing. "Jesus Christ," whispered Major Tom Bradley, the flight leader, his finger frozen over the weapon's release. Did she just say Valkyrie-62? In the second F-22, Captain Lisa Chen was checking her tactical display with hands that had begun to shake. That call sign was retired 5 years ago. The pilot was listed as KIA. But they had all heard the stories. Valkyrie-62 was legendary in fighter pilot circles, the squadron commander who had single-handedly held off enemy forces while an entire regiment of ground troops evacuated from an impossible situation. The pilot who had disappeared after disobeying orders to abandon American soldiers to certain death. "Control, this is Raptor Leader. We need immediate confirmation. Did that civilian aircraft just use a classified military call sign?" Isabella, her memories now flooding back in torrents, took control of the situation with the calm competence of someone who had faced much worse odds. "Aircraft captain, reduce altitude to 25,000 feet. Adjust heading to 090 degrees. Immediately." The co-pilot stared at her in amazement. "Ma'am, you can't just—" "Do it now," Isabella commanded, and something in her voice made him comply without further question. As the commercial airliner changed course, moving away from the military exercise zone that had created the crisis, Isabella used her cell phone's flashlight to signal through the aircraft window. Short, long, short, short, long. long Morse code that she hadn't consciously remembered knowing, but which her hands produced with muscle memory developed over years of military training. In the lead, F-22, Major Bradley received the light signals and cross-referenced them with classified mission data from 5 years earlier. Control, the authentication codes are correct. This is definitely Valkyrie-62, but that's impossible. She was confirmed KIA in 2019. Isabella's final transmission, broadcast over the aircraft's intercom system but clearly intended for the military pilots, carried 5 years of suppressed pain and determination. Raptor leader, I've got 240 civilians on board, and I'm not losing anyone else today. Flight attendant Maria Santos later told investigators, when she stood up and spoke, it was like watching someone wake up from a 5-year coma. Everything about her posture, her voice, her authority, completely transformed. I knew immediately that we were going to survive. The transformation of Isabella Moretti from quiet bookshop owner to military commander was so complete that passengers in the immediate area began recording video on their phones, capturing the impossible moment when an ordinary woman became someone else entirely. But the real drama was playing out over encrypted military communication channels, where the reappearance of Valkyrie-62 was sending shockwaves through NATO command structures across Europe. Confirm identity. Valkyrie-62. This is Control Actual, came the voice of a senior officer who clearly recognized the call sign. Authentication required. Transmit your pilot identification code. Isabella's response came without hesitation, the numbers and letters flowing from her lips as if she had spoken them yesterday rather than 5 years ago. Victor 77 Delta Niner. Authentication Bravo 66 Alpha. In the NATO Command Center, Colonel Sarah Mitchell stared at her screens in disbelief. The authentication codes were perfect, matched classified records exactly. But the pilot who had used them was officially dead. Ma'am, her communications officer reported, the codes check out, but Valkyrie-62 was reported killed in action during Operation Desert Shield in 2019. Her aircraft was shot down over enemy territory. No survivors recovered. Isabella's memories were now returning in devastating waves. She remembered the mission that had ended her military career. The impossible choice between following orders and saving lives. The moment when her F-22 had taken critical damage while providing cover for evacuating ground forces. Engine failure. Hydraulics gone. Aircraft uncontrollable. Mayday. Mayday. Valkyrie-62 going down. Tell my squadron. Tell them The crash. The explosion. Waking up in a German hospital with no memory of how she had gotten there. But she also remembered why she had made those choices. The faces of 300 American soldiers who would have died if she had followed her orders to withdraw. The radio calls from ground commanders describing overwhelming enemy forces. The split-second decision that had defined her entire career. Control. This is Valkyrie-62. Isabella's voice carried both pain and resolution. I need you to patch me through to General Patricia Hayes. CENTCOM. Authentication code Tango Mike 77. The request sent another wave of shock through the command center. General Hayes had been Isabella's commanding officer 5 years earlier, the woman who had been forced to sign the orders declaring her missing in action. Within minutes, a familiar voice crackled over the secure frequency. Valkyrie, dear God. Isabella, is that really you? For the first time since her memories had returned, Isabella's voice cracked with emotion. Yes, ma'am. It's me. I'm sorry for disappearing. I didn't have a choice. Where have you been? We searched for months. Your aircraft was destroyed. We found wreckage, but no body. Isabella looked around the civilian aircraft, at the passengers who were now watching her with expressions ranging from amazement to terror. I've been learning to be someone else, but right now, I need to get these people to safety. The F-22 pilots, still maintaining their escort formation, were listening to the exchange with growing understanding. Valkyrie-62 hadn't been killed in action. She had survived, but something had cost her everything she had been before. Raptor leader, this is General Hayes. You are ordered to provide full escort and protection to that civilian aircraft. Valkyrie-62 has special status. Major Bradley's response carried obvious respect. Copy that. General. Ma'am? Valkyrie, it's an honor to fly with you again. But Isabella wasn't finished. The crisis had triggered more than just her memories. It had awakened her sense of responsibility for the people under her protection. She addressed the aircraft's passengers over the intercom, her voice now carrying the calm authority that had once commanded fighter squadrons. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Isabella Moretti, former captain, call sign Valkyrie-62. 5 years ago, I was a military pilot. Today, I'm going to make sure all of you get home safely. The businessman in seat 24B, who had earlier dismissed her as just another nervous passenger, stared at her with new understanding. You're really a fighter pilot? Isabella's smile was sad, but determined. I was. I forgot for a while. But some things you never really lose. As the commercial airliner, now under military escort, approached London Heathrow Airport, word of the incident was spreading through aviation circles worldwide. Social media posts from passengers, recordings of Isabella's radio communications, news reports about the mysterious woman who stopped an international incident, all of it was creating a story that would dominate headlines for weeks. But for Isabella, the most important moment came when a small girl in seat 26C, who had been crying throughout the crisis, approached her as the aircraft prepared to land. "Miss, are you really a soldier?" the child asked. Isabella knelt down to the girl's eye level, her voice gentle but honest. "I was a soldier who forgot she was a soldier. But when people needed help, I remembered. Are you going to go back to being a soldier now?" Isabella looked out the window at the F-22's still flying escort, at the emergency vehicles gathering on the runway, at the media trucks that were undoubtedly waiting for her arrival. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I know I'll never forget again." The landing was smooth, professional, executed with the kind of precision that suggested the pilot had been influenced by Isabella's calm presence in the cabin. As the aircraft taxied to its gate, passengers began applauding. Not the typical polite applause for a safe landing, but the sustained ovation reserved for genuine heroes. Isabella remained in her seat as passengers disembarked, many stopping to thank her personally, some asking for photographs, others simply reaching out to touch her hand. "You saved us all," whispered an elderly man, tears in his eyes. "I was ready to die, but you brought us home." But Isabella was thinking about more than just this single flight. Her memories had returned completely now, including the classified information about ongoing military operations, the strategic knowledge that had made her disappearance such a security concern, the tactical expertise that NATO forces might desperately need. As the last passenger left the aircraft, Isabella stood up from seat 24A and looked back at the ordinary airline seat where an extraordinary transformation had taken place. A passenger later posted on social media, "I watched a quiet woman reading a book become a military commander who saved 240 lives. It was like watching someone remember they were Superman. I'll never look at airplane passengers the same way again." London Heathrow Airport had been locked down for what officials called a security incident involving military aircraft. But the truth was spreading through social media faster than any official statement could contain it. Videos taken by passengers showed Isabella's transformation from nervous traveler to commanding military officer. Audio recordings captured her calm voice, giving orders that had prevented an international incident. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing footage of the F-22 escorts that had accompanied the civilian aircraft to safety. Isabella emerged from the aircraft into a chaos of flashing cameras, shouted questions, and military personnel who had been hastily assembled to handle a situation unlike anything in aviation history. General Patricia Hayes had flown directly from NATO headquarters in Brussels, arriving at Heathrow just as Isabella's flight touched down. The reunion between the two women was captured by dozens of cameras, but the emotion was genuine and private, despite the public setting. "Isabella, we thought we'd lost you forever," General Hayes said, embracing the pilot she had been forced to declare dead 5 years earlier. "I lost myself for a while," Isabella replied, her voice steady, but carrying years of suppressed grief. "But when those people needed help, when I heard military radio chatter, everything came back." The debriefing took place in a secure conference room away from media attention, but the implications of Isabella's return were already reverberating through military and political circles worldwide. "Captain Moretti?" General Hayes began formally, then stopped herself. "Isabella, we need to understand what happened to you. Your aircraft was destroyed. We found wreckage, but we never found you." Isabella's account was fragmented, but consistent. She remembered her F-22 taking critical damage while providing cover for evacuating ground forces. She remembered the aircraft becoming uncontrollable, the decision to aim for what looked like an empty valley rather than crash into populated areas, the impact and explosion that should have killed her. "I woke up in a German hospital 3 weeks later. No identification, no memory of anything before that moment. The medical staff said I'd been found by hikers, suffering from severe head trauma and exposure. What followed was a 5-year journey of trying to build a new identity from nothing. Isabella had been discharged from the hospital with basic refugee documentation, had drifted across Europe, eventually settling in Rome where something indefinable had drawn her to stay. I had dreams, fragments, images that didn't make sense," she continued. "But the doctors said trauma amnesia was common, that I might never recover my memories. The psychological evaluation that followed confirmed what everyone suspected. Isabella's memories had returned completely, along with all her military training, tactical knowledge, and command experience." "Ma'am, what are your intentions now?" asked Colonel James Mitchell, the intelligence officer assigned to handle her case. Isabella's answer surprised everyone in the room. "I want to go back to my bookshop. I want to return to the quiet life I built for myself." "But you're one of the most experienced fighter pilots in NATO history," General Hayes protested. "Your tactical knowledge, your combat experience, we need officers like you." "General, with respect, I gave the military everything I had 5 years ago. I disobeyed orders to save 300 soldiers, and it cost me my identity. my career, my entire life. I'm grateful that I remembered who I was in time to help those passengers, but I'm not the same person who flew combat missions. The media attention was overwhelming, but brief. Isabella declined all interview requests, avoided the celebrity appearances that networks offered, and quietly returned to Rome after just 3 days in London. The passengers from Flight 447 wouldn't let her disappear again. They created social media groups, shared their videos and stories, and maintained contact with the woman who had saved their lives. Many made pilgrimages to her bookshop, bringing their families, wanting to show their children what real heroism looked like. "You don't look like a fighter pilot," observed 8-year-old Emma Walsh, whose family had traveled from Manchester to meet Isabella. Isabella smiled as she arranged books on her shelves, the same patient movement she had used before her memories returned. "That's because I'm not a fighter pilot anymore. I'm a bookseller who used to be a fighter pilot." The transformation in how her neighbors viewed her was subtle but profound. The same people who had called her La Donna Perduta now spoke with quiet pride about having La Pilota living in their neighborhood. Military officials made periodic visits, keeping her informed about developments related to her previous missions, offering opportunities to return to active duty, but respecting her decision to remain civilian. "The offer stands permanently," General Hayes told her during one such visit. "If you ever change your mind, if the world ever needs Valkyrie-62 again, you have a place with us." Isabella's response became her standard answer to all such offers. Valkyrie-62 saved 300 soldiers and then saved 240 passengers. That's enough heroism for one lifetime. If you believe that true strength isn't about proving who you are, but about being who people need you to be when it matters most, type VALKYRIE in the comments. 2 years after the incident that had restored her memory and made her briefly famous worldwide, Isabella Moretti had successfully returned to the quiet anonymity she craved. Her bookshop in Rome continued to serve the neighborhood, though it now attracted a steady stream of visitors who came not for literature, but for the chance to meet a living legend. Isabella handled the attention with the same calm competence she had once brought to fighter aircraft cockpits. She would politely answer questions about her military service, sign autographs for aviation enthusiasts, and pose for photographs with the patient grace of someone who understood that her story had become larger than her personal preference for privacy. But the most meaningful interactions were with the passengers from Flight 447, many of whom maintained regular correspondence with the woman who had saved their lives. Emma Walsh, now 10 years old, sent weekly letters describing her progress in school, her dreams of becoming a pilot herself, her determination to help people the way Isabella had helped her family. "Dear Captain Isabella," one letter read, "I told my teacher about you, and she said you're a hero. But I know you don't like being called that. So I'll just say you're my friend who used to fly airplanes." The businessman from seat 24B, Marcus Chen, had completely changed his life after the incident. He sold his consulting firm, established a foundation to support veteran mental health services, and credited Isabella with showing him what real strength looked like. "I spent my whole life thinking power came from controlling situations," he wrote in a thank you letter. "You showed me it comes from taking responsibility for other people's safety." Military aviation circles continued to study Isabella's case. Both her original combat record and her dramatic return to action during the Flight 447 crisis. Her story became part of pilot training curricula, taught as an example of how training and instinct could overcome even severe memory loss when lives were at stake. But Isabella herself remained focused on the present rather than the past. Her bookshop had expanded slightly, adding a small section devoted to aviation history and military memoirs. She would sometimes notice customers reading accounts of conflicts she had participated in, but she never volunteered her personal connection to the events described. Late at night, when Rome settled into peaceful quiet, Isabella would sometimes climb to her apartment's small balcony and watch aircraft navigation lights cross the star-filled sky. But now, instead of the inexplicable anxiety those lights had once triggered, she felt only a calm satisfaction in knowing that somewhere above, pilots were safely completing their missions. The silver pendant she now wore openly, engraved with Valkyrie-62, served as a bridge between her two identities. She was no longer the lost woman who had arrived in Rome with no memory, but she was also no longer the military officer who had disappeared into a mountain valley 5 years earlier. She was Isabella Moretti, bookshop owner, former fighter pilot, and guardian angel who had proven that some responsibilities transcend memory, training, and official duty. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is remember who you really are when others need you most. If you believe in stories that touch the heart like this one, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to SN Quiet Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.